There we go. What I'd say is that you want to tie this back to your prior experience, and you want to tie it back to how you practice it in an ideal environment and like how you've done it in the past. So when you're talking about the differences between C and Java, use a practical experience at a time that you have used C or Java or whatever languages you're talking about. This is just really placeholder. And then explain like, okay, with these in practice, I use this, and here's some examples, and this is why I know that they're different and they have different uses, because that's what they're really looking for. Also talk about the use cases and less about the technicalities between the two, like the syntax and all that stuff. They're not really looking for that per se. They're more looking for that you understand how they're used and why they're used and why the two languages exist like they do, not like the history or anything like that. Also explain some practical facts, like in this example, C and Java, one of the biggest differences is that they have memory management differences and their syntaxes are different in terms of like pointers and references. And some of that stuff is very important. So I would definitely mention that in that type of question. Okay, next one. What is your favorite programming language? So this one, be honest, that's like the very first thing. Don't try to lie. If you know that they're looking for JavaScript programmers, or you know they're looking for like Java like programs, something like that, don't try to lie and just be like, JavaScript's my favorite language because you're looking for that, right? That's not what they're looking for in this case. I'd say what they're more looking for is excitement behind the role and excitement behind the language and the stuff that you've used in the past. And so you have two options here. You can either go with one that you're good at, or you can go with one that you've recently picked up that you're trying to learn. And there's pros and cons for both. I'd say if you go with one that you're good at, you can show the skills and like give examples of how you used it before. But if you go with one that you don't have as much experience with, you can show the initiative that, hey, I'm learning it. I'm trying to pick this up on my own. I'm trying to do something new. And that is also extremely valuable. And so you can tie in like your past knowledge. So for example, if I were to answer this question and I would say something like, oh, my favorite language currently is Go because I picked it up, and Go is a really interesting language because it does this instead of that. And I found out as I learned it, like these types of things happened. And I was able to pick it up faster because of my experience with Python, because of these types of similarities, something like that. And that will really be a strong answer for this question. And again, I'm just going to frame all these questions. And by the way, like these are just examples and kind of things to think about when you're answering them. All these questions that I'm going to be saying today are just like, you have to make it personal about you, honest about you, obviously. But these are just what I think, just my opinion and what I would give, not necessarily the truth or anything like that. So the next thing, which is, what are static classes in blank? You will get these types of questions. These are like some pretty, I guess what I'd say, not as enjoyable type questions where they're just looking for a quick answer. I say these are fairly simple. You want to just give it a quick answer, not a lot of opportunity to go into making it a story or a personal thing. Like you don't want to have a question where they're like, what is a reference in C++? And then you start talking about like a story about how you use C++ and learn from it. This is not a question that they're looking for that. You're going to see these types of questions in technical interviews. Often they're going to clump these together into like a quick fire type session where they're asked like, what is static class, in Java, especially the language that they're looking for. What is static class in this? What is asynchronous in that? And blah, blah, blah. This is purely just they're looking to see, do you know what this language does? Do you pass like the minimum requirements for what this rule would be? And if you start answering it wrong, they will be a little bit like raising flags. But I do have a way out. I do have a strategy of, if you don't know the answer, this is my strategy. It's tie it into other uses of the same keyword or the same concept in other languages or other contexts that you do know. And so you explain your thought process in that as you're saying it. So for example, if they're saying like, what is a static class in Java? And I don't know, let's say I don't know what a static class is in Java, but I do know what a static variable is in C, because let's say I learned that in freshman year and I haven't learned Java in sophomore year yet. I can be like, oh, I don't know what it does necessarily in Java, but I do know what it does in C, because C, it means it's like a constant variable in memory, blah, blah, blah. And so based on that assumption, I can assume that static might have some sort of relationship to that. So what that does is it shows that you're trying to be creative in this quick little, quick fire answer. You're trying to look like, you're showing your thought process, even though you clearly don't know the answer. And you're showing that you have experience somewhere else, even if it's not what they're necessarily asking for. And so that is definitely like a really cool way to kind of skirt around that and show a different type of thinking. Okay, so okay, give an example where you showed leadership. This one's a little bit thicker. I think this is the last one. Okay, yeah, so this is the last one, 7 minutes. I'm gonna open up, like you can ask questions for the last 5, but an example where you showed leadership, it's gonna be a little bit longer. So pretty much, I don't know if you guys have heard it before, but there's something called the STAR method, which is situation, task, action, and result. And pretty much just a quick overview of what that means. When you're given these types of, like, give an example where you showed this quality type questions, you're going to want to look into what the STAR does. And you can like find literal articles that are super long explaining like what these are, but I'll give you a quick rundown right now. So the situation, you need to give them enough context of the situation, and the situation is specifically where you fell in the situation and what role you played in that situation, enough that they're invested, enough that they understand where you're going to take this. And that's why there's the S. And then there's the task. So in this case, you have where you showed leadership. This is the practical thing. You know, what did you do? What task did you do? And why did you do it? And a little bit of context of the actions that you took that led up to that, or the thought process that led up to that. And then the next one is action. So as the task was at hand that needed to be solved, what action did you take to try to address that, that task? So in this case, if you're talking about leadership, I could say like there was a, let's say as a project that I was thrown into because somebody wanted me there, and I identified that they didn't have a project manager, right? And that they were doing like just developers talking with each other. And I identified that the task at hand was that they had only developers interacting and they didn't have somebody to lead them or structure them. So the action I took was position myself in a way that I could do like both software and PM. I just made that up, which you shouldn't do on interviews, by the way, but that's an example of like how a STAR kind of looks. And then the last thing is result. This is the most important part, which is what is the result of what your leadership and what you did and your action that you took, and what result did it have on you as a person? How did you grow? How did you develop? But also, what result did it have on the impact of the entire team and everything like that? What result did it have? What did it lead to? And what did it cause for everybody that made a rippling effect? What impact? You hear that impact buzzword a lot, but these types of questions will be able to show, and you'll be able to show like that impact. So I have some more stuff. So give a real example for these types of questions. Don't lie. That's just a huge thing. Just don't lie. If you're on the spot and you really don't know something, don't lie, because those recruiters, sometimes they talk with each other, sometimes between companies, they're friends, sometimes people know stuff. And if you lie, it sometimes is traceable, and it could just really look bad on you, and you could get blacklisted from a company, but that's not super common. But just, and if you do lie by accident, let's say you're put in a situation, you're in a lot of pressure, and you accidentally tell a story that's not true, don't get too worked up, because the likelihood of all the stuff I talked about you should be warning you for, very low. But don't make it a habit. Don't try to do it at all. If it's unintentional and just happens, try to correct it, or try to like make it not awkward, but just don't try to lie. So leadership can come in many forms in this example. So it could be like an org. It could be a time that you stepped up in a student project. It could be a time that you took lead with volunteering. It could be a time that anything, there's leadership, and you don't have to be a traditional leadership or in a traditional leadership role in order to show leadership. And that's a huge thing, like that I've definitely learned. Like a lot of the times, like when I was given this question, I was not in a leadership position in org at the time. I was like in student engineering council, but I was just a member, like an MAL. And so there were a lot of opportunities for me where I'm like, oh yeah, I took leadership at this specific event. Here's the event that I'm talking about. This is not something where you can just be like, even if you do have a executive role in an org, if you talk about the role itself, that doesn't mean as much. Talk about a specific instance in that time where you can use the STAR method that makes sense and conveys that type of leadership to something practical that they can digest. So yeah, you can be leader and role. They want to see what you did. They want to see what impact you had on the result. I talked about this, what impact you had on other people. Okay, the other thing is you want to talk about efficiency. So a lot of the times leadership has to do with making a complex situation much simpler and communicating it in ways that people understand it. And if you communicate them into a way where it's so complex that they don't know what you're talking about, that will not be a very strong example for your case of showing leadership. So you want to communicate it in a way that's succinct, that's like to the point, kind of efficient, but also you show that you're able to do that in situations where it matters, which is just being efficient as a leader. So the other thing is talk about how you felt in the process. and why you might want to, why you wanted to lead and what impact it had on you personally. So I touched on this earlier, but this is a big thing because a lot of the times leadership positions or times where we showed leadership even within a non-leadership position will be like a formative process for us in a time that we really grew and developed, and they want to see that because they want to see interpersonal growth. And that's why when people are saying, you know, we're looking for leadership positions on the role on your resume, I mean, you don't actually need to have those positions if when you get the interview you can show that you have those qualities without being in those positions, right? Leadership positions are overrated totally. The experience that you can get in any position, in any org, even in group projects and stuff, you can just get what they're looking for, which is those qualities. So I know I said I'd have time for questions, but I don't really. But if you guys have any questions, please send that here, and I will be able to address that within the next minute or two before the transition.
So Jacob, quick question. What advice do you have that applies more to higher views that are just like recorded questions and answers?
What's the question?
Does that advice that you gave all still apply to higher views?
100%.
Like the recorded
100%.
stuff?
Yeah, higher view. I'll give a quick little spiel on higher view. Higher view, there's a few things that you want to keep in mind. This is completely off the hook of what I was going for, but higher view, you want to make sure you have good lighting. You want to make sure that you practice like impromptu speaking. So the best way to practice for higher view, hello, somebody just joined. Somebody asked about higher view. I'm quickly going to address that right now. So you want to practice your impromptu speaking, which is like given a topic, you can think of like points about that applies to what you're doing. So they're going to give you like a prompt. They're going to give you like 2 minutes to talk about that. Structure your thoughts, have like A, B, and C, 3 points, and then like some examples. So if you're given a minute, you can write down 3 points, which is like, this is 1 point that goes to what I'm saying. This is another point, this is another point. Each point, if you can get an example, that's good. 2 examples, last one, have a conclusion. And then look at the camera, at the oracle. Don't actually look at the screen when you're doing it because it makes it look like you have eye contact. Everything else I said applies.
Thanks.
All right, so now I gotta move on to the next section, which is the normal questions. These are, I call them normal because it is what I'd say, you know, medium questions, again, don't really exist. These are just like normal questions that you will get, average questions that you probably will get, and stuff that, you know, yeah, you'll probably get these questions or something of this form, but they're a little bit more complex than the ones that I talked about before. So this one, you're going to see this one. This is a very basic one, but I do have some notes on this that I would like to cover. So tell me about yourself. So this one is a time that you want to be genuine. You want to show your personality. You want to show a story, and you want to talk about what you do. You know, you can start out with basic technical stuff. You can talk about your tech core, but then after that, you can go into your interests. You can go into your on and off campus involvement. You can show qualities about you. And then also an important thing is when they're hiring, they're not necessarily looking for skills. They're looking for the thought process. They're looking for the ability to learn, the growth mindset, which is just like, I will be able to go forward in this, the ability to work with others. And that's really what you're giving the freedom with this question to do all those things, to show those qualities. And then you want to frame it around the role itself. So everything that you say wants to be framed against the fact that you're applying for a specific role. So when you have a tell me about yourself and you're applying for like an embedded systems type role, you might want to emphasize more on the embedded systems experience that you have while showing those qualities and less on the other qualities or the other experiences that you've had just because you're tailoring it towards the role itself. So you also want to mention your past experiences, but don't just start going into your resume as if like you're listing off bullet points or going too in depth about the things that you're talking about there, because you know this is a brief thing. It's like a paragraph. It should be a short, less than 20-30-second type introduction. It should not be an essay going into all the details. Consider how your past experience relates to what you're applying to. So this is another thing about the tell me about yourself. If I'm, for example, like when I was applying to Microsoft and I got the Microsoft interview, in my tell me about myself, I did mention that I worked at American Airlines, but I also mentioned that specifically, you know, the work that I did at American Airlines surrounding like certain software architecture would apply specifically towards the role that I'm looking to get at Microsoft, which is a really good introduction. It kind of frames the whole thing around of, oh, this person actually fits here and this person would bring value to the company. And that's something that you want to mention. So only talk about stuff that you can support with examples. Again, don't lie. But the other thing is, like, if you mention certain things, specifically on your resume or certain things about you, you want to make sure that they're things that you can really talk about and really things you can go in detail in. So if you mention something about a project you've done, but you're not able to go into detail about it or know a lot about the project and somebody else really did it, but you didn't, but you mentioned it, that's not a very good look for you, and it's not really the best use of the question. So the last thing is personality breaks the ice. So this is a perfect opportunity for you to show your personality, kind of have fun with the question, be real, be honest, tell them about yourself. I think I mentioned this, but talk about your interests, talk about the things that you do for fun, talk about your creative process. Like for me, I produce music and I love writing. I'm not the best like music theory, but I love writing music. I love doing that type of stuff. And so I like to mention that and to tell me about yourself because it shows qualities about me that I want to show to them. And so that's the next big thing. Okay, so what's your favorite project you've worked on? So this one, you want to try to pick the project that fits the role the best, but it's also a project that you're excited about. So in this case, you want to pick a project that's relevant to the role you're applying to, but you can also really talk about. So for example, if you have an art project that you really like the most, but it won't really apply towards the role that you're applying towards, then you shouldn't really talk about that one as your favorite project, right? So I'd also say to try to incorporate things like teamwork, if applicable, ability to learn new things, what you liked, and all those stuff that, that type of stuff is really a good chance for you to show those types of qualities about you with this question. Tell a genuine and engaging story. So this one, I have a fun example where, for example, like embedded systems class, like on our final project, there's some really funny stories about bugs that we found that turned into features, or things that were just like really funny, interesting stories about and what made it really memorable to me. And they like to hear those stories because they're just people too. And I'm sure they have really funny stories about things that happened with their projects, or really interesting stories, or times that you went in a crunch. And as you'll see, like in the industry, when you get there, when you start like interning or like working full time, you'll see that a lot of the managers and a lot of the coworkers, they really connect to people on those types of stories. And that's what you'll hear all the time. You'll hear so many stories like that, and you'll hear a lot of people really nostalgic about that type of stuff. And so that's a really good chance to bond with them and really lock in that connection with them. And that's what this question's all about. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions? I think it's pretty chill now. We got 2 people here. I think I probably scared everybody away by saying don't come to the room. But that's a good thing. They do need that technical type of experience. But yeah, how's it going?
Actually, I do have a few questions. This is kind of a dumb question, but like for Expo next week, is it basically like we just give our resumes to recruiters, and then like I know that there's like a chat feature or something like that, but I don't really understand like how it works. Is there like this, like are we being asked these behavioral interview questions and technical, or like is that after they decide they want to interview you? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so this is the second step in the process. So for Expo and any networking event, you go there, you pitch your resume, you talk about yourself. They might ask you some very basic preliminary questions, not this type of stuff. This type of stuff would really go for the interview. So this is after you're selected for an interview. And so that, which if it happens or not, I know freshman year, I don't even know if I got any interviews. I might have gotten like 1 or 2 maybe, but this is like the second step in the process. But even so, like knowing about this stuff and knowing about why they're looking for, what they're looking for, will help you frame yourself when you're pitching and you're asking them questions during the expo themselves. And so I think the way it's structured is going to have like the resume is pulled up, and then they'll be able to talk to you directly, like while calling them, like pretty much briefly on expo. I think that's the way it's going to work. So they'll be looking at the resume when talking to you.
Okay, and also like regarding the resume and stuff, I know that like a lot of times for jobs you apply for a specific role, so you're supposed to kind of tailor your resume like to that role slightly.
Mhm.
But like for things like expo and stuff like that, when we're just applying, or like when we're just going to a bunch of companies, do we just make it like general, or like?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this question, but somebody else joined, so I'm going to continue going on this until the next question section. But what I'd say is that you want to make sure that the resume is pretty modular. So like, for example, I think since I was applying only for software engineering type roles, you know, even though front end, back end, embedded systems are all different, I had a resume, like a baseline general resume that I could use for most companies. But if there's a company that I really want to specify, like reorder stuff to make it more appealing to them, I might change the ordering of some things. I might change the bullets to emphasize some things more or not. But I'd say in general, that is not something that's super important. I think after a certain point in my school year, like sophomore year, I ended up having like just the same resume for everything because it had everything I wanted to sell about myself for any technical type role. And it showed like both my leadership and like involvement, but also my technical skills. And I'd say for like a freshman in general, you should probably not take the time to make customized resumes per company. And as you get older and you start figuring out exactly like what you want to do, what type of software, what type of hardware you want to do, that will become more like even more like you'll not need to do that pretty much. So I'm saying I would not recommend doing it so much, but there are some roles where it could help to reorder and replace.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Feel free to interrupt me because again, it's a small group for this one. So interrupt me anytime if you have questions.
Wait,
And
I
then,
have a question real quick.
sure.
Well, regarding the tell me about yourself question, I know like the question is supposed to kind of like organically represent you or something.
Mhm.
But like how exactly do you start off a question like because I know like there's like some people have like I've heard of some people who have like a formula they use like or say they give this like the same answer every time, but like I'm not sure how you would start off a question like that considering it's so broad. There's so many places you could start. Do you have any kind of advice for that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, first of all, don't do that thing that people do, which is have the exact same answer every time. And the reason why you don't want to do that is because it becomes very robotic. It becomes very artificial, right? If you can tell when people are memorizing the speech versus when they're generating speech, right? There's a very big difference between the two. And so don't do that for one thing. I would definitely recommend not to do that. But what I say to remember is you can remember talking points, like general things. Like for me, what I'll remember is that I want to mention my name. I want to mention my year. I want to mention my graduation, like graduation year, second thing. I want to mention like my major in tech course. I want to mention my work experience. I want to talk about my involvement on campus. I want to talk about my personal projects. I want to talk about like qualities about me. And, you know, that's the type of stuff. It's like bullet points about you, and memorize those bullet points. And then each time you give your tell me about yourself answer, you string them together in a way that feels organic and it feels natural. And it might not be perfect every time, and it shouldn't be because that's just how the answer looks. So for me, whenever I answer the question, it might sound pretty much the same in the beginning because that part's the same, you know, like if they say it, you know, my name's Jacob, I'm a third year EC student going down the software engineering track. I have work experience at both Microsoft and American Airlines doing software engineering. I'm super involved on campus. I love producing music. I do that in my own free time, you know, something like that, right? So start it out with that type. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now I'm going to go into why. Oh, so, okay, yeah. Why did you choose ECE? So this one, I think I talked about this many times, but tell a story, tie it into a practical sense. Talk about your industry awareness. So, right, if you are aware of the industry, or if you're not, I definitely recommend getting at least somewhat acquainted with it. Talk about like why the industry interests you, right? Not just about where ECE is now or where ECE was in the past, but talk about where it's going. Talk about what excites you for the future because you're a student, right? And if you invest in a company, they expect you to work there, I don't know, at least 2 to 4 years, hopefully more for them. And so they're going to be there for a while, and they want you to be there for a while, and they want to see you have your eyes set for the future. And so if you talk about, you know, the industry, where it's going, like for me, let's say I'm going to data science, which I'm not, but let's say I was going into data science in terms of my tech field, I'd say something like, oh, you know, data science is really progressing within like the facial recognition technology and like generating other people's faces. I think that in this example where I saw artificial intelligence be used in the Microsoft edge-to-edge cloud and their devices, that's super cool to me, blah, 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 because, you know, something like that. Again, I'm just speaking non-English gibberish, but I think you get the gist. Talk about the industry. That's a really good, a good way to sell that. The other thing is talk about your personal interest and investment that got you into ECE. So for me, you know, my story was that when I was a kid, I used to take apart Xbox 360s that overheated, right? I took it apart, they died, and I cleaned them up. And because of that, I learned the insides of hardware, and I got interested in EC because of that. And it could even deviate. Like for me, I always tell this story, and I'm like, I got into it because of Xbox, because of that overheat, took it apart, got into hardware, got into ECE, realized I didn't like hardware, went to software, right? And that's a funny story because it's like switcheroo. And in high school, I always thought I hated software because of APCS. I thought I was never going to do it. And now I'm going to work in that industry, right? That's interesting. It's personable, and it tells a personal story. If you don't have a personal story that's super cool sounding, it doesn't matter, right? As long as you don't lie. I've talked about this 3 times now. Don't lie. Don't lie about your story. Don't make it up. Don't make it sound more fantastical than it is. You have many different options to do. You can talk about the industry. You can talk about your personal experience. You can talk about both. You can talk about like your parents' experience, which got you inspired. You can talk about somebody you look up to in the industry. There's many different things that can be really personal in this answer. Also, if money was a factor, don't mention it. And then, yeah, next question. Okay. Describe a time when you made a suggestion to improve something on the project that you're working on. This one is the definition of a medium type normal question. Give me 1 second. Let me drink water. So I'm going to make it a little bit more interactive now because I can. So if you can send to the chat what you think, and there's 3 people here, so I hope you participate if you can, please. But I think this will help you out too. If you could send to the chat, what do you think they're looking for in this question? Like what qualities do you think they're looking for in you? So if you could send that in the chat, and then I'll talk about it. Just like 1 or 2 things. Teamwork, attention to detail, constructive approach in the project. Awesome. Wow, we got 3. That's 100% participation. That is on my resume. Okay, so I'd say, yeah, teamwork definitely. What time? Describe a time when you made a suggestion to improve something. 100% teamwork. They'll definitely be looking for that. That is really applicable in any industry. Attention to detail. Yeah, I think that's again something. Yeah, that's a good observation because sometimes when you suggest something, it's something that you feel like only you noticed and that not everybody noticed, and you're paying closer attention than anybody else. I think that's good. Constructive, approaching the project in a really open-ended way. Yeah, I also think that's true because sometimes people are very narrow-minded about where they want to see a project go, that they don't think about other ways to deviate. So yeah, you guys are all definitely correct. And so I'll add a little bit more context on that. So some other things that they might be looking for here is action orientation, like being action oriented, self-motivation, not escalating a situation. Like you've seen, I'm sure you guys have seen like times where somebody suggests something in a very non-intrusive, non-violent way, but somebody takes it defensively in a way that it gets to a big meme. Don't do that. I hope you're not that person. I've been that person, that happens. But anyway, we all grow, we all learn. We're people, but they're looking for not that. And then how to provide constructive criticism. Yes, this is another thing because suggesting a problem and how to change something is definitely something that you're going to see in the industry, and finding a way to provide that constructive criticism is very important. They want to see how you go about this because it does happen all the time. Turbulence in the industry is common, like things will change. Situations where you've demonstrated this before will apply to their company no matter what, because things change all the time. People need to suggest improvements all the time, and it's something that they're looking for. Okay, next question. Why do you want to work at this company? All right, so yeah, this one, I don't have participation in this one quite, but in the future ones I will, I promise. So in this one, you want to show that you've done your homework. So I need to drink more water. Okay, show that you've done your homework. This pretty much means show that you've done research on the company, show that you actually understand the company to a basic extent, but also show that you're interested in learning more about the company, specifically from the person that you're talking to learn about their viewpoint and learn about like what they think about the company. But that's like a continuation of this question. But to go specifically with this question is that you want to relate it to something specific. So when I say like, when do you want to work at this company, or why do you want to work at this company? You can refer to something like an article that you read, an event that you were at, that's a huge one, like a tech talk that you were at, like a networking event that you were at, some professional dinner that you're at, a page that you read on their website, a video that you watched of an inspiring leader there, something specific that made you feel inspired to work at that company would be very valuable and can really sell that. Also, act natural. Be your best. I talked about this before, but be your best genuine self. And what that means is you want to be honest about what you feel about the company. So you don't want to be like lying about that you want to work at this company just to get the job. Like, even if you don't want to work at the company really, but you really want a job, try to find something within their culture, within the tech stack, within something in the company that makes you find that connection, that makes you want to work there, at least some degree. And really, like, without lying, just focus on those truths when you're answering a question like this. And that is the key to making it not look bad. So tie it into your own cultural interests. So for example, at Microsoft, there's something called growth mindset that they really use. And I think it's a really nice type of way of thinking that they really push within the company. It's like one of their main policies within the culture. And so for me, if I were answering this question for Microsoft, I tie in examples of how I used growth mindset in my own life to improve my own life, and how that could apply to the company, and how I know they value that so much that, I already employ that type of cultural thinking, that it's a good thing. Because to them, it's like, we don't have to try to impose on this cultural thinking already, because they already have practiced it, and I'm not trying to paint them as like evil people trying to impose anything on you. You don't have to swallow up all company culture, but this is just, the way that you can kind of look good in a question like this. And it's also trying to, be honest. Talk about your future. And I talked about this before. Again, talk about your future. Talk about your growth at that company. Talk about where you want to be in that company, why you think that you can grow at that company, not just your career growth, but individual personal growth. Why do you think that you could grow at this company? And they like to hear that a lot, because often most companies take pride in the fact that they can grow their employees to become better people, to become more of what they want to be. And if you think, and if you're selling the fact that, hey, I think that you can do that for me, they're going to like that. Next question. So, what value will you bring to this company? So this is a little bit different. It's in the same strain. So I'd say be specific about the technical ability and the interest in the field. Talk about, why you're interested in the field, how you're interested in the field, specific about your technical abilities. So this one's a bit more technical. This is more cultural. This is more technical. So talk a bit more like, these are the skills that I have, or even these are the ways that I approach to learning these types of skills, or I am interested in this industry because I spend time researching it, blah, blah, blah. Talk about both your soft and hard skills that you think you can bring to the company. Refer to them about points on your resume specifically. So when you're talking and you're talking about like, hey, I think that my Java development will help at the company, and I really know that, and I know this team uses Java. And so if you look on my resume under this experience, you can see that. And then they look at it, they start reading it, then you talk about it, then you talk about your soft skills, you tie it all together, nice package. Talk about what makes you unique to the company, so then they feel that you're singling them out. This is a psychological thing. So pretty much if you make them feel like you're being unique to the company, they feel special. And people like to feel special, right? And if you make the company feel that you think that you're special to that company, and that you're bringing unique value to that company, and that there's like this special connection, even if it's like, hopefully it's not fake, at least it's like some, it is true, but it's a selection of the truth, right? It is like, you find something, and I said this before, find something that you think you can have that channel. Once you establish that channel, you think, and then you can communicate your value to them in a way that is communicated to them in the best way possible for you to leave the best impression possible. So next thing, give an example of how you prioritize tasks. So now going back to the open-ended interactivity, please send what you think that they're looking for in this question. Alrighty. Um, so oh, my phone just randomly inverted. So pretty much, yeah, these are good organizational skills. 100% reliability. That's a huge one. That's a really good. That's really good. That's a really good identification of that. Yeah, that's awesome. Being sure you can apply those skills to the company. Yep. Time management. Time management. Yes. So you guys, all three of y'all, picked like the biggest points. Good job. Organization skills, reliability, time management. That's like what they're looking for in this, and y'all nailed it. So that's literally what I have written. So good job. So the other thing is flexibility, maturity, responsibility. These are just things that they want to see. You know, a mature person can deal with their own calendar, they can deal with their own life and like stuff. And you know, they want to see that. They want to see those things. But that's also just, you know, by the way, side tangent, it's also a variation of the truth, because pretty much everybody in the industry, all adults, everybody's just a bunch of children too. Everybody's just big kids. People still have issues with that stuff all the time. I still do. You know, I got a job. Everybody does. And so don't feel pressured that you have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. But the thing is that they are looking for examples that show those qualities, right? They're not looking for a one size fits all answer. They're looking for something that's pretty unique to you. They're looking to see if you're organized enough to have your own planning figured out. Give a concrete example of not just the fact that you have a system. Like I can talk about, oh, I have a Google Calendar and like this task managing thing called Power Planner, and I use it every day. That's great. But if you can use examples of how it made your life better, or how like a specific example where you needed it to make sure something was critical, something critical actually was accomplished because of that, that is much stronger than just stating the fact that you have that system in place. Okay. How many more do I have? Perfect. Perfect. Wow. Okay. Talk about a time where you worked in a team and things didn't go as planned. Okay. Just like the last time, my last question is going to be a little bit thicker. 5 minutes for it. All right. So this is STAR again. Situation, task, action, result. I already talked about that. But pretty much if you don't know what that is, look that up. And then I'll just still go through what you can answer for this. So this one, again, pan out the situation, set up context so they know what's going on, make them feel invested, right? And this is like any marketing thing. You know, think about resume recruiting. You're marketing you. You're marketing yourself. You're like a hot commodity on the market, and they want you, and you got to feel like they want you, and you got to give off the impression that they want to hire you. And if you do that, you got to think about how do you get them invested in your stories when for any of these types of questions, right? Get them invested by giving them enough context that they understand what's going on. And then you pick a situation that highlights your strengths at best. Don't randomly pick a situation where everything went bad, right? Things you're like, okay, yeah, things didn't go as planned, and then everything was bad. It was a waste, you know? You don't want to pick a situation where it's all bad. Pick one that you showed something like adaptability. You showed that though things didn't go as planned, you made it better, or you made something out of it, or you made it work, or you made it at least get past the bare minimum, but because of the situation, the circumstances, that was awesome, right? Show something about you. And this question, you're given a lot of freedom. So you can show things like adaptability, you can show things like working well with others, you can even showcase technical skills or learning something new. It's really up to you, but I just say, you know, really pick a situation, set up the context properly that they understand what's going on, have them invested in your story, and then pick a situation where you can show a good quality. That is the key to this type of question. Okay, so we got how many minutes before we go to the hard section? 3 minutes. All right, any questions?
I did have a quick question about like the technical interview part. When do you suggest that we actually start preparing for technical interviews and doing like leak code and stuff like that?
So, honestly, you know, I'd say, are you talking about like for this recruiting season or just in general?
Like just in general, like for like because like I don't think most freshmen have like started doing leak code or anything. So I don't know, like when do you suggest we start doing that?
Yeah. So honestly, damn, I should have, when you tell me that, I should have framed the whole thing in the beginning instead of not come to mind. I should have been like, if you're less experienced, come to mind. Anyway, doesn't matter. So I think that you should probably start focusing that on maybe the summer of freshman year, maybe the first semester of sophomore year, probably the summer of freshman year, so then you can be ready for the recruiting season at the beginning of sophomore year. Because you know, freshman year, you know, you can get a job if you do everything perfectly and you put in a lot of work to catch up to the experience that sophomores and juniors have. It is difficult. It is doable. And I don't want you to like feel like I shouldn't even apply, because you probably should. But like set your expectations that it's realistic that you wouldn't get an interview or offer. You might get interviews, but it's realistic you won't get an offer, but you could. Remember, you could. And so depending on what you want, right? If you want to be the freshman that really puts in the time and really invests and you really feel like you need an internship, then I would start like as soon as possible, right? But also no, there's no pressure or anxiety or at all to get an interview or an internship as a freshman. I think it's like, I don't know, 10%, less than 10% of freshmen get interviews, and a lot of them don't even try with good reason. Like there's, you know, you don't really, there's no pressure to get it. If you're not in a financial situation where you need to get an internship freshman year, you know, don't feel pressure to do it. But if you really feel like you need it, start as soon as possible. But ideally, if you're going for like a reasonable target, which I'd say sophomore year summer, which is what I went for, start practicing that type of stuff on and off passively sophomore year or freshman year summer.
Okay, and just one more question, sorry.
No worries.
About how long are the behavioral and technical interviews, and are they like back to back?
Yeah, so a lot of the times they're integrated, and it really depends on the company itself. So I'd say that, like for example, at American Airlines, it was I think it was one interview, and it was like behavioral, technical, whiteboard problem, and then back to behavioral, and then you know that's kind of the way it was structured. So, but at Microsoft, it was like 30 minutes, 25 minutes technical interview, 5 minutes behavioral, and then on the on-campus interview, it was like all technical 2 questions, and then all technical again. In the very last 15 minutes was behavioral. So there is no formulaic way of doing it. It's very much, you know, a general, depending on the company.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna head out, but thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right, good luck.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we're gonna get started with the last section, which is the quote unquote hard questions. So they're definitely gonna be a little bit more tricky and a little bit more thought inducing and a little bit more situations. And I will go through pretty much how you can approach in ways that I think is successful. So give me 1 second. All right, let's get started. So describe yeah, I know it's longer, right? Describe a situation in which you have experienced a significant project change that you weren't expecting. What was it? How did that impact you? And how did you adapt to this change? How did you remain productive through the project? Okay, so I think somebody new joined, but hello, by the way. I know it's a pretty small group, but if you are interested, if you're interested in participating, this is what I've kind of been doing. So if you want to send in the chat what you think they're trying to test here, like what qualities they're looking for out of this question, I think it's a good exercise. And then I'm going to talk about that and more on the context. So please go ahead and send that here. And then I'll answer, there's some questions here. I'll answer that as well. All right, so before I get into that, let me quickly answer. So the question was, in Expo, do you only go to companies that you researched? No. So what I'd recommend is to have a top 10 list of 10 companies that you feel like you want to work at, whether it's because of technical or because of behavioral and cultural alignment. Those are your top 10 companies. And then you have like a bottom 15 where if you have time, you do research on them, but it's like 15 companies you do want to work at, but you're not as passionate about as the top 10. And then you have like anything past that 15, so past that 25th company, which is a lot already, right? And it's not going to probably even be that, but it might. Then you can still, if you have time at Expo and you didn't get to all those companies, you can still pop in and like check out what they're like. You know, sometimes during my Expo route, back when it was in person, I had like company A here, company B there, and there's company C that I was kind of interested in. I'm like, I might have missed them. So I went to A, and then on the way to B, I just stopped at C, said hi, see what's up, drop my resume, go to C. So definitely you can talk to them. All right, so reflecting honestly on the mistakes in which you did well. So I'd actually say it's not really focusing about mistakes in this case, because the way that it's framed, it's just saying like a change in your project that you weren't expecting. It doesn't say anything about that you're the reason the change in the project happened, which is a very, very distinct difference. And I think I have one later, which is specifically about you. But in this case, because they're not mentioning that, you have the freedom to interpret in a way that you want. And I'd say if you're given one where you can interpret it where it's not just about you, totally go down that route, because you can often show more interesting qualities, which I'll get to. The next one, which is flexibility, problem solving, 100%. Flexibility is a huge part of this. Problem solving is a huge part of this. See what you do, assign an unexpected job. Yep, that's totally the case. Sometimes you're just given work that you are not super passionate about, but you have to find ways that you can problem solve around it and make it work for you. Okay, so the qualities that they're looking for in this are adaptability, as we also, in addition to the ones we talked about, adaptability, not taking things too personal. If it's your own work is put into question after the fact, sometimes people will question your work. Sometimes people will ask, hey, we need to have this changed. And you need to show that you're not going to take it too personally, that you're not going to be so defensive about it, and that you're not going to be defensive in general, because often if you do that, it's not, you're too attached to the code that you wrote or the project that you worked on, and less attached to the goal of the mission of the project that you're assigned, which is really what's important. And they want to see that, because often, in software engineering, if that's the field you're going into, code will be changing all the time. Like my project at Microsoft that I wrote, it's there, but in a year from now, if I do go back full time, which I'm still deciding, but if I do go back full time, there's going to be like changes to that code, and it's not going to be exactly the same. And if I got defensive about that, it's not a good look. And they want to see that you're more attached to the goal, less attached to the work, right? Not getting too attached to a single piece of code. Okay, I talked about that. So you want to also explain in good detail the baseline of the project itself, so they understand the situation and they get mostly emotionally invested into the situation. Again, I mentioned this in a past question. There's going to be many types of questions where you have to frame it in a way and you give the context where they understand, they get invested before you start talking about the problem and like the solution. So justify the reasons on why the change happened in the first place, instead of just condescending the change. So there's a reason that there's a change in any project, especially at work, right? Like at Microsoft, I had to refactor, like my first 3 weeks of code, I had to refactor it in the 4th week, all of it, right? And it was frustrating and I got, it was upsetting, but there was a reason for it. It was better for the team. It's more maintainable code. It's better for everybody. And so if you justify the reason rather than defending your original work, that is a quality they're looking for, right? You're like, oh, somebody suggested that I refactor the code, but that's a good thing because XYZ business impact, right? That is what they're looking for. So focus less on the how it impacted you and more frame on how it might motivate you to move forward and take it positively in the future with this feedback and with this change to your project. Also talk about how it could change your reaction to stuff like this in the future, and show examples of how you maintain progress afterwards, because it says how do you maintain productive after the project. If you answer this question correctly, you kind of already answered that last trailing question implicitly through the whole thing. And often with these like multi-question questions, there's like an overarching concept and things that hey, this is what they're looking for. And you can give like one big answer that addresses all of that within a one thing without like splitting up, like this is that, this is that, this is that. And that can be really choppy, and that's not really what they're looking for. Okay, next question. All right. Tell me about a time where you had to present a complex programming problem to a person that didn't understand technical jargon. You can replace programming with like hardware or whatever field you're in. How did you ensure that the other person understood you? All right, so I'm gonna ask one more time, real quick. What qualities do you think that they're trying to test here? Just send it in the chat really quick. I'm actually gonna quickly use the restroom. I'll be right back. It'll be like less than 2 minutes. Please don't bail on me. I'll be right back. Thank you so much for not bailing on me. I appreciate it. All right, so communication, understanding your work as best you can. First principles. Okay, so communication, definitely. I think that is very general. I think that is 100% what they're looking for here. Understand your work as best you can. Yep, I think that is a big thing. Oftentimes people might not fully understand the work that they're doing. They just might understand a portion of it or like their short-term goal. But if you can't understand the whole thing and ways to explain it to different layers of people with different levels of experience, that is really important. First principles. So what are you referring to in that case? First principles? Okay. Yeah, so I think first principles is, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to there, so I'm going to go to the next one. But if you want to clarify, feel free in the chat. Ability to teach and thought process, 100%. I think the ability to teach is something that they're always looking for because mentorship is a big part of learning in any companies. When you join, there's going to be people with like 5 to 10 years of industry experience all around you. And doing that and being able to teach it and mentor other people is part of your long-term value at that company. So the next thing, yeah, so understanding what you're doing, yeah, 100%. First principle, okay, that's what you mean. Yeah, understanding what you're doing at a fundamental level, yeah, 100%, totally agree with that. I think that is definitely what they're looking for. So I think in this question, there's some more stuff that they might be looking for, and is getting your ideas across. I think we talked about that. Talking to someone with less domain knowledge than you. So it's all good. Couldn't find the right word. Okay, it happens to me all the time. So talking with somebody with less domain knowledge than you, I think that's a really big skill that you need to have, because in college, you're around people that know the same stuff as you generally. If you're in one class, you can talk to people with similar experience than you. If you have one company and like an intern program, often you, at this point, you start getting more diversified in your experiences. But what they're looking for is the fact that when you're talking to people about something that, you know, especially programming, I feel like people have a tendency maybe to get like elitist with it and stuff like that. You know, explaining it to people, or like especially business people, because that's the realistic way it's going to apply, where tech people have to explain the business need and something like the implementation to a business person who doesn't know as much technical stuff about it, but they're still just as important to the overall mission of selling it to the customer or the product to the customer or getting it done. But it's just a different role. They want to see that you don't have like condescension, that you're not arrogant, that you're patient with the person that you're explaining it to, right? That you're not trying to confuse the other person with pride or like, you know, weird jargon or things that are trying to trip them up. You know, if there's jargon, think about using easier, you know, words that can substitute that, or ways that you can explain the jargon up front that make them not feel bad, right? So they're trying to see, you know, that you can communicate to somebody who knows less than you about that topic 100%. And it's a really nice video I'm going to link here, which is, oh man. Yeah, I'm going to send it. Just give me 1 second. Here it is. Yeah, so this is a video you can watch in your own time. Not right now, but this is a fun video that kind of goes through this concept of how you can do it well. And this is like explaining quantum computing to different levels of experience. I really like that video, and that kind of goes to this. You can always explain the whole concept to somebody without going to all the details, and explaining that you got enough across, but you chose the important stuff. And then also, like, you can explain the business need enough to the business context to the point where you're not going to be rambling and wasting like the business person's time. Okay, so next question. Okay, why did you choose to include blank on your resume? This one's really interesting, and you'll only get this question in a few situations. I'd say if you have a particularly condescending or prideful type in a recruiter, which you might, it's very realistic. Don't let that discourage you. I've actually had, you know, let me give a quick little anecdote. There was one time when I was at Expo, and there's a guy there that looked at my resume, and he's like, the first thing, like when I was trying to talk to him about like the role, he's like, I think this should be there, that should be there. Like, what are you doing with the ordering? You know, I'm not looking for this. I don't think your experience is really good. Give it back to me. And I was like, that hurt, because that really hurt because it's from a recruiter. Felt bad. Don't let the haters bring you down. You know, it's just like one recruiter, and it felt worse than like 10 recruiters in a row saying good things about it, right? But really, you know, you probably shouldn't value one bad thing equals 10. It should be flipped, right? Like 10, like one good thing should outweigh 10 bad things, right? Something like that. It's hard to think that way, but you know, I'm still working on that myself. But if somebody asks you this question, the immediate reaction, I'm sure, is going to be a defensive stance, right? And you're going to feel defensive, and you feel like you got to defend yourself. And in a way, you do need to defend yourself, but don't take a defensive stance, right? Instead, turn it into something inspiring. Turn it into something of, you know, explain, why did you put it there? Like, why is it really there? What do you think, what value does it have? What does it say about you that makes it awesome, right? And so, for example, I talked about this briefly before. On my resume, there's a part under projects where I have like a bunch of technical projects, but at the bottom, I have my music production, which is not technical, but it's still on my resume. And, you know, when people ask me, you know, about it, I always say, hey, I think writing and producing music allows me to work with new types of people who have different types of thinking, which is really applicable to your role because of XYZ. And it makes me think outside the box and solve creative solutions, including design and things that I've done for this, blah, 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 blah. You know, there's ways that I can translate that experience to something that's very specific to the role that's awesome. And it sounds awesome. And sometimes, even if it's something that they don't even ask you, why'd you include it? If you put something like that, which I call it your X factor, which is you, about you, something you do, something that's fun, that's not super technical. Sometimes you even want to like take the time to point it out explicitly. Like I've done that before, where I'm talking with the recruiter and my music thing's on there. They don't address it, but like before I leave, I say, hey, I just also wanted to point out that on my resume, you know, I do music production, and I think it's really important because of the same thing that I just said earlier, right? You just have a different transition. And so that is what this question is all about. Don't take it too defensively. Okay, this question, the classic question, you've seen it before, and you're going to see it again, and I'm going to go over it. So what is your biggest weakness? Hate this question, awful question. It's kind of phasing out. It's not that popular anymore, but it might still be asked at some companies, especially the older companies, maybe the bigger companies. But so showing a weakness that is not critical of the success for the success of the role. So for example, if I was going for an embedded system role and they asked me, what is your biggest weakness? And I'm like, programming, right? That's not what they want to hear, and that's not exactly what's going to help you get the job. So you want to find a weakness that's not critical to the success of the role. So show a weakness that you have, but also show that you're taking proactive steps to move away from it, and they know where you're from, right? So if you're saying like, I don't know, let's say your biggest weakness is presentations, and you're like, you know, my biggest weakness is presentations, but I've been aware of this fact for a while, and I've been taking steps by, you know, going to these workshops, being involved in this to get away from it. But I know that it's still my biggest weakness at the point, right? It shows that you're humble about it. It shows that you're honest, and it shows that you're taking steps to move away from it. And it also shows that you're human, right? Don't try to frame a strength as a weakness. That is one of the most common mistakes, and it comes across, honestly, it comes across as pretty arrogant, and it comes across as really distasteful, right? You don't want to try to frame something that is good about you when they're asking something that's objectively bad about you, right? You can show that you have something bad that you're working on. That's very different than showing something that's good and you wrap it, or good and you wrap it in a bad package. That's weird, right? Like for example, like saying, oh, my biggest weakness is that I help people too much. Right? That can actually be a real biggest weakness depending on how you frame it. But let's say my biggest weakness is that I help people too much, and they always, you know, thank me for my help and all that stuff, and I think it's great. But it's my weakness because sometimes I think, you know, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, something that sounds really weird. Don't do that one. You just want to show that you're self-aware and that you're self-critical and that you're constantly growing and learning and reflecting on yourself, because, you know, that's what they're looking for. You're not a perfect person. Nobody is. And I think they know that, especially at the level that you can be recruiting at and our age, that's what they're looking for. Okay. All right, so on to the negative topics. I know this is why it's like the hard stuff. The reason it's hard, because it's harder to talk about these topics. So tell me about a time you failed. Okay, if they ask this question, they're probably looking for, they probably have that accepting failure and moving past failure is an integral part of their culture, right? And there are many culture, like many companies, where like accepting failure and growing from failure is literally a part of their culture, like written in text or something derived from that. And so if they ask you this question, then they either practice it or explicitly advertise that this is part of their culture. And so that means that this is a critical question that you answer properly if they ask this question. So taking failure and helping you grow as a person is a really big and difficult, you know, thing to do, but it's also what they're going to be looking for in this question. So They want to see that you tie back your failure into personal growth and something that you do, right? There's like that phrase that failure is the best teacher, and they want to see that you've embodied the fact that failure is a good teacher, and that, you know, even though I failed at this point, I was able to learn from it and apply it. And then, you know, what's really nice to say is that if I didn't fail at this point, I don't think I'd be the same person I'd be today. And I don't think I've been able to progress because of all the things that I can attribute to that failure. And I have many things like that where I totally failed, but I was like a huge learning lesson for me in order to like overcome it. And I'm sure that everybody in this chat also has. And it's taking a bad situation and looking at it with a more positive light to move forward. And that's not, you know, easy, but I'm sure you can find at least one applicable example that you can apply to it. And it could be a lot of things, but it's good to keep it within your role. So for example, you know, a good example would be if you failed a class with an ECE, which I'm not saying don't do that if you can't. If you can, avoid it. But if you do end up doing that, or if you end up doing bad, or you fail an exam, and if you get away from that, if you dig yourself out of that, it can be a really good story, and it's very applicable towards the role, right? And that is also something that, you know, just something in general, keep in mind, like having a positive mindset about failures, and like thinking about when you're on the other side of it and growing as a person is a really cool thing. And it's also just really practical. Failure is one of my best teachers. I've failed so much, big time, and it's helped me become a better person. Okay, tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult person to accomplish a goal. What was the biggest challenge? How did you handle it? All right, so we're back to the involvement and participation. So please send in the chat what you think that they're trying to look for in this question. If I can find the Zoom chat, which okay, there it is. How well you work with others, collaboration. Okay, there we go. All right, so how well you work with others, 100%. That is definitely, I think, a general thing that they're looking for. Collaboration, pretty much the same thing. Adaptability, persistence. All right, yeah, so those are all true, but what they're really looking for in this question is conflict management. They're looking for that particular skill. And that is not exactly the same as those things. And I think, you know, finding out exactly what they're looking for in those questions is really important, because the reason we know that the main point is conflict resolution is because it's saying, like, think about it, conflict resolution, the two words. It says, tell me about a time you work with a difficult person to accomplish a goal. It literally says difficult person, which is conflicting interests with you, to accomplish a goal, which is a conflict, because it's a conflict because you're trying to reach something. What's the biggest challenge, which is synonymous to what was the conflict, and then how did you handle it, which is how did you resolve the conflict. And that's why we know we can decipher this and be like, they're looking for conflict management. And if you took it and you started going towards adaptability or collaboration and all those things, that's correct. But it's like, you know, those AP Lit, the bullshit, sorry, but like where it's like the best answer. It's like, these are both correct answers. What's the best answer? In this case, the best answer is to go for conflict management. And it's about finding common ground, not taking things personally. They want to see a success story, not a failing story in this case, because we just talked about failure, but they want to see a success story where you did resolve a conflict. They want you to answer all parts of the question. You want to focus mainly on how you handled it. They aren't too concerned on how the other person handled it. You can talk about the other person in the context of the situation, but they want to hear about how you handle the situation and how you deal with conflict and how you resolve it, because conflict resolution is a huge part of any role. And so you can tie it back to how you use that type of thinking in the future, right? You're like, oh, this is an example where I use conflict resolution to solve this. So in the future, when I was given another problem that was similar, I was able to use that same type of thinking here. And now you have two examples of you using conflict resolution. And so, you know, that is what they're looking for in this question. And it's a big thing in the industry. All right, next question. Okay. All right, so describe a circumstance when you were not able to achieve a project goal that was set by your supervisor. Okay, how did you handle this situation? What is the outcome? All right, so again, one more time, I think this now, yeah. So please send what you think they're trying to test and look for you in this question. Think about the wording. All right, so I don't think we have any takers for this question. Okay, but that's all right. Okay, okay, sorry, you're just typing that up. My bad. All right, task management. Okay, perseverance. All right. Okay, so all right, let me go through these. So perseverance. Not yes, I think that is a good one because they're asking you about something that you're not able to achieve, but you still like took it to the end. If you ended up talking about perseverance in that answer, it would be a good answer. Task management. I think it is a good topic, but it's not the best for this question, just because the wording of what they're saying when you're not able to achieve something in a project goal. So they're more talking about the fact that you weren't able to achieve the project goal and like how that impacted you, which I think is more something like perseverance is more applicable. So task management is not exactly what they're probably looking for. And then would it be here where you just start reflecting on your mistakes and what you can improve? No, unfortunately, I don't actually think that that's super applicable with this one because I think, yeah, like how you reflect on your mistakes and what you can improve it's a good thing to keep in mind, but I don't think it's exactly what this is talking about. This is not really a reflection problem. This is more of a very specific situational thing. So I'll go into like what they're looking for mainly. So the reason that they're asking this question is because rescoping and reorganizing project goals and like expectations is a very common thing in companies. So for example, at Microsoft, like my project scope of the internship up front was very different than what the scope and what was dynamically changing to the very end. And the reason why is because if you're integrating like a service or something that impacts other parts of the of the company or like what you're working with, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of different parties that are going to be impacted with what you're dealing with. And so I would say that they're looking for more how you can adapt and like rescope and reorganize your priorities. So you put down like task management. I'd say yes, but it would be task reorganization is what they're looking for, not exactly just management, and not exactly adaptability either. That's like in a new situation. This is, you're taking something and you have to completely restructure your own timeline, and you have to deal with the fact that you did not reach something, you weren't able to achieve something. And so how did you make it work for you and the team, right? So if you're not able to achieve something, show how you're able to communicate the changing requirements along the way. For example, if you realize, hey, I didn't think this problem was going to be like take 3 days and you thought it was going to take 1 day and you assigned it to me, they want to see that you communicated to your upper management that, hey, this took way longer than you told me it was going to take, and so I'm not able to really reach that last goal. They want to see that you can communicate when people overestimate the work or underestimate it and give it to you, and that you can like resolve that type of timeline to make it on the same time, like same timeline for both of you guys. Because often this type of stuff is not in your control, right? Like when somebody finished a part of the project that was supposed to be assigned to you, but all of a sudden, they did it before you could touch it. Now you have to realign that, you have to fill in for that gap, right? And you don't have anybody to blame because it was just the whole bureaucracy of the company. And like sometimes that just happens. So it's out of your control sometimes. So being honest about that, talk about how you change the course of the project, but rebalance them to make the expectations realistic. And this is a huge thing that we see within interns at Microsoft and even other companies, which is why a lot of them do not succeed. And it's because when they get like some scoping of their project, they work on it, and all of a sudden they realize some stuff takes way more time. They don't have the resources that are applicable for them to get the job done in time. And so instead of rescoping the project, they have like either a pride issue, or they don't feel comfortable talking to and communicating it, that they're just going to try their hardest, overwork themselves, try to reach those unrealistic goals when they could have just communicated in the second week, hey, this is unrealistic. Can we make the goals different? And then the manager's like, yeah, of course. And now you're reaching a new expectation that everybody's sitting with for a longer period of time, and you can reach that goal and everybody's happier, right? So being more upfront when things are more difficult, that is definitely something that is more important, and that is what they're looking for in this question. Okay, we have about a minute. Let's see. Okay, perfect. This is the last question. Tell me about a time when you took ownership of a project. Why did you do this? What was the result of you taking the challenge? What could you have done if you did not take ownership? So this one is pretty much just about the responsibility for your own work, understanding that you as an individual have contributions. If you're working on a team, you know, it is very important to have team dynamics and work well with teammates, but you have to be able to identify, where do you bring value? Where does the other guy bring value? Where does your friend who's on your team bring value? But, you know, understand that different people on the team have different strengths and weaknesses to work on the team in order to be successful. And so they want to see that you have that responsibility and self-reflection of ownership, that you can bring your own value and you're self-aware of what value you bring, right? And you can also see how, like, if you demonstrate that this is what you think that you're valued at and like what qualities you bring to the company, you know, this is very like a more complicated way of saying, and a more hidden way of saying, like, you know, what value do you bring to the company, except it's a bit more focused on the individual part of the ownership, right? Which is, and you do have to tell a story because it's asking for ownership of a project. You do have to tell a story, give a specific example. What they're really looking for is like the value, right? Craft a situation. What they're not looking for is, if I didn't step in, nothing would have changed, right? Because it's saying, what could have happened if you did not take ownership? They're not looking for a situation where, oh, if I didn't do anything, nothing would have changed. They're looking for a situation where, oh, I stepped in and it made a big difference, right? And this is what happened, right? Because I took ownership, this would happen, right? That's what they're looking for. So craft and pick a situation that shows the most impact. So look for one, again, that's applicable to what you're applying to, but look for one where if you didn't take ownership of something, it would have been like detrimental. Those are really more dramatic and more interesting, and you probably remember them better. So try to pick those. So the why portion, explain how you identified a problem that maybe no one else was addressing. I think we talked about this before. Somebody else in the chat brought this up, which is identifying something. You know, you can talk about, you know, I took ownership of this project because I identified that there are issues here and I felt that it was best suited for me to do it, right? Yeah, so any questions? Because now in the main room, I think we're going to take general questions. The event officially ends at 8:30, but there's like general Q&A from 8:30 to 9 in the main room. But if you guys have any questions here. Okay, yeah. So if you don't have many interesting stories on your own experience, I'd say that is totally fine. A lot of the times you can just talk about not just your stories, but talk about stories that are relevant to what you're focusing on. So for example, I think we talked about, there are questions where you can either talk about your own stories, or you can talk about new stories that you're making on the mark, right? So for example, if you're applying for a company where it's about like, it's the qualities they're looking for is perseverance. That was a good one. And let's say you're reading the company policy about perseverance and you're like, I relate to that quality. And then you go on, you find a video on perseverance by that company and a speaker at that company. And then you're like, that's a really good talk. That's a story, right? Like sometimes stories can be made. Sometimes things can happen when you're researching the company, right? As long as you're genuine and you're interested in that and you're looking for doors to be opened with that type of opportunity, you can kind of create those things. And sometimes it could even just be things that you're interested in and stories about that. Sometimes they don't have to be super relevant to what you're talking about, but you can tie it in to what you're talking about in ways that sound interesting and in ways that keep them engaged. Because at the end of the day, behavioral interviews are really just, you know, how long can you keep a good impression with these people and show that you have the right skills and the right qualities that they're looking for. And there's many different ways to do it. And I think, you know, my approach, because my experience and what has been effective for me is really, a lot of it is based on storytelling. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. But there's ways to do storytelling that can be about like how you learn something or how you appreciate a quality of something on a technical side. They don't have to be like actual stories of like things that happened. It could even just be like trains of thoughts that you had while developing a skill or something like that. I hope does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, I had a question as well.
Sure.
So, so I guess it's a little related to the last question, but so like whenever you go into an interview, I was wondering if you like have a set, like have some stories like already thought up in regard to each question, or if you like just, or if you think are more improvisational, I guess like what's the preparation before the interview, or especially for behavioral interviews?
Yeah, so I think definitely nothing pre-made. like in terms of like memorizing the entire story. I'd say that there's some good exercises. I think we did in like engineering communications, and I think this is a pretty good exercise, which is finding like common technical behavioral interview questions and like putting it in a table. And then you have like, you just write down examples of times that happened to you. So like, let's say it says, tell me about a time that you worked with a teammate and you didn't get along with the teammate, but you still made it work. You know, you write down examples of where that happened in your life, whether it's like high school, like, I don't know if you're a freshman right now, but like anytime that happened within your life. And then you just write down all those examples, and just having more is better. And then you can really think about them, and just like having them written down. Sometimes then you can just like ponder on that. You can write down the actual situation that happened, and then you can write down like bullet points of like what that means about you, like what good qualities does that show about you that you could show to recruiters, right? What does that apply to any, you know, any of those types of roles? And so before an interview, when you know a company's cultural values and you know what they really value, you can look back on that sheet that you made, and you can look back and think back of the stories that you've told and you've written down yourself, and you can say like, hey, this one's better. So if I want to find a way that I can apply this story to a question that they ask, I'm sure I can find a way to do it. Or you can have like a bunch of them, and don't try to like memorize them, just like have them and have like a working memory, like generally, so that the stories, it's going to be different each time. But as long as you have like the baseline idea and like some of the points that you want to hit, it'll be pretty strong.
Okay, thank you. And I'm actually taking engineering communications right now, so that's perfect.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Who do you have it with?
I have it with the petroleum department.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I don't know how that's
Yeah.
structured, but yeah, I think all of them cover a lot of the similar topics anyway. So
Yeah, I was taking it with them because I heard not to take the ECE one.
yeah, where'd you hear that from?
I've actually heard that from like a lot of upperclassmen. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the seniors from last year, I heard it from some of the seniors, and like even like whenever we did another IEEE meeting, one of the other first people said, "Oh yeah, it's better to take a petroleum one."
Yeah, you know, just to speak on that, I think okay, so they have general questions. So after this, if there's any more questions, feel free to ask. But then we're gonna go to the general room for general career questions. But yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I think the ECE one just takes a lot of time, right? It takes a lot of time, and it's hard to balance it with other courses because they require you to do a lot of iterations on papers, and like if something's off, you have to like redo it, and you have to do like a project with it. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of like time. Yeah, that's really it. It takes a lot of time and effort. But what I'll say is like I really did appreciate the ECE one because I feel like it taught me a lot of stuff that was very practical towards like ECE recruiting, and I feel like it was time worth spent. But that's just like I'm probably like one of the only ECE majors you'll find that would recommend the ECE one. And so that is just my opinion, but I think you have perfectly validated in taking the non-ECE one. And sometimes I even think about the time I would have saved if I didn't. So
Well, also, I like that was like my main. That's what I was thinking whenever I was jumping into the registration. But then I found out it also doesn't work in my schedule. So none of the ECE ones fit in my schedule for some reason.
there you go.
Like I was trying to go for the mechanical one originally, and then I didn't get it. So I had to like quickly scramble and try to find a replacement 333T. And petroleum was the only one that fit.
Oh, damn. There you go. Yeah, sometimes that's how it works out.
Yeah, and then they're like, I heard afterwards, it's like everybody's like, "Oh, petroleum's the best one." I'm like, perfect.
Yeah, there you go. That worked out for you then. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So anybody else have any more general questions before we go to the main room? I think they're just answering like with the director ECAC for general career questions. But thank you so much. I think y'all sat through most, or if not all, some of you all, some most. I know it's a smaller group because I kind of directed people away. And I do agree that I think the technical interview ones, if you don't have as much experience with that, it might have been more helpful for that. So that is 100% okay with me. And it was a nice small group. I think we were able to do some cool interaction because of that. So yeah, just any more questions? If not, then I'll see y'all in the main room for general questions, or feel free to leave. It's totally optional, but they're answering general career questions. So
No, thank you very much.
yeah, no worries. No worries. Hope you all enjoyed it.